Hey everyone, and welcome back to English Mastery Podcast. I'm Megan, and I'm here with my co-host Adrian. Today we're diving into something that's super important for all English learners: real-life conversations in English.
That's right. And you know what? This is something that even advanced English speakers sometimes struggle with.
Oh, definitely. I hear from our listeners all the time about how they feel stuck or nervous when trying to keep a conversation going in English.
Yeah, we all know that feeling when there's an awkward silence and you're just not sure what to say next. But don't worry. Today we're going to teach you how to keep those conversations flowing naturally without feeling uncomfortable.
I love that. And we've got some really practical tips and examples to share, right?
Absolutely. We'll show you exactly how to use simple questions and phrases that native speakers use all the time to keep conversations going. Trust me, by the end of this episode, you'll feel much more confident in your everyday English conversations.
Now, to help you understand these conversation techniques better, we're going to introduce you to Candace and Alec. They're going to show us a really common situation that happens in restaurants.
Right, so picture this. Candace is sitting at a cafe, looking at the menu, and Alec, who's a regular at this place, notices her looking a bit uncertain.
Oh, I love this scenario because it's something that happens all the time, isn't it? Whether you're traveling or living in an English-speaking country, restaurants are places where conversations with strangers just naturally happen.
Exactly. And what's great about this situation is that it shows how easy it can be to start a friendly conversation with someone you don't know.
And you know what I really like about this example? It's not just about ordering food. It's about those little social interactions that make up our daily lives.
That's such a good point, Megan. In a restaurant, you might chat with other customers, servers, or even someone waiting in line. It's these small moments that give us chances to practice our English in real situations.
So, shall we listen to how Candace and Alec's conversation unfolds?
Yes, let's hear how they handle this everyday situation using some really natural English expressions.
Hey there! I couldn't help but notice you've been looking at that menu for quite a while. Having trouble deciding?
Oh, yeah, there are just so many options. I'm a bit overwhelmed, to be honest.
I totally get that. I remember feeling the same way my first time here. What kind of food are you in the mood for?
Maybe something light, but also filling, if that makes sense. What would you recommend?
Well, their Caesar salad is amazing, and it comes with grilled chicken. That's actually what I usually get for lunch.
Oh, really? That sounds perfect, actually. Do you come here often?
Yeah, I work just around the corner, so I'm here at least twice a week. Their coffee is pretty great too.
Good to know. I just started working nearby, and I've been trying to find some good lunch spots.
Well, you can't go wrong here. The service is friendly, and everything I've tried has been really good.
Thanks so much for the help. It's nice to get recommendations from a regular.
That was such a natural conversation. Adrian, I noticed they used quite a few interesting phrases to keep the conversation flowing. Could you break down some of those techniques for our listeners?
Of course. One of the first things you might have noticed is how Alec used an observation to start the conversation. Instead of just saying hello, he commented on something he noticed: that Candace was studying the menu for a while.
Oh yeah, that's so much better than just saying hi, right? It gives the other person something specific to respond to.
Exactly. And did you notice how Candace used filler words like "oh" and "you know" in her responses? These little words make the conversation sound more natural and give us time to think.
I definitely caught that. But what about when Candace said, "if that makes sense"? Why do we use phrases like that?
That's a great question. Phrases like "if that makes sense" or "you know what I mean" are what we call hedging expressions. They help soften our statements and invite the other person to engage with what we're saying.
And I loved how they built on each other's responses. Like when Alec mentioned he works nearby, Candace shared that she just started working in the area too.
Yes, that's called reciprocal sharing, and it's super important in natural conversations. When someone shares something about themselves, it opens the door for you to share something similar.
What about asking follow-up questions? Candace did that really well when she asked if Alec comes there often.
Absolutely. Follow-up questions show you're actively listening and interested in what the other person is saying. They're like conversation fuel. They keep the discussion going naturally without feeling forced.
Now, let's give our listeners some practical tips they can use right away. One thing I always find helpful is having a few go-to questions ready. What are some of your favorites, Adrian?
Well, I like to keep it simple. Questions like, "How's your day going so far?" or "What brings you here today?" are great conversation starters. The key is to ask open-ended questions that can't be answered with just yes or no.
Oh, that makes sense. And I guess you can use these in lots of different situations, right?
Exactly. Let me give you another example. Let's say you're at a coffee shop and someone's getting the same drink as you. You could say something like, "Oh, that's my favorite drink too. Have you tried it with an extra shot of espresso?"
That's such a natural way to start a conversation. What about when you're at work or school?
At work, you could say something like, "How was your weekend?" and then follow up with something specific like, "Did you try that new restaurant you mentioned last week?"
I love how you're building on previous conversations there. What about when you feel stuck and don't know what to say next?
That's when reaction phrases come in really handy. Things like, "Oh, really? That's interesting," or "No way, Dantiriad." These show you're engaged and give you a moment to think about your next response.
Could you give our listeners an example of how to use these?
Sure, let's say someone tells you they just got back from vacation. You might say, "Oh, really? Where did you go?" Then after they respond, you could say, "That sounds amazing." From you, "What was your favorite part of the trip?"
These are such helpful tips. Any final advice for our listeners who might feel nervous about starting conversations?
Remember that most people actually enjoy talking about themselves and their experiences. You don't need to be clever or funny. Just show genuine interest and be a good listener. And it's totally okay to use phrases like "you know" or "like" while you're thinking. It makes you sound more natural and relatable.
All right, now it's time for some hands-on practice. We want you to pause after each example and try these conversations out loud.
Yes, don't worry if you're by yourself. Practicing out loud is one of the best ways to build confidence. Ready to give it a try?
Let's start with something simple. Imagine you're at a coffee shop and someone's waiting in line next to you. Here's your first practice scenario.
We'll give you the opening line, and then you should pause and respond. Here we go. "This line is pretty long today, isn't it?"
Go ahead and pause the podcast now. Think about how you'd respond and say it out loud. Remember to use those natural expressions we talked about.
How did that feel? Now let's try something a bit more challenging. Imagine you're at work, and a new colleague joins you in the break room. You want to start a conversation.
This time, you'll start the conversation. Think about those opening questions we discussed earlier. Take a moment to practice saying your conversation starter out loud.
Excellent. Now let's practice those reaction phrases. I'll say something, and you respond with an appropriate reaction phrase and a follow-up question.
Here's the situation. I just moved here from Canada last month.
Pause now and practice your reaction. Remember phrases like, "Oh, really?" or "That's interesting." And don't forget to add a follow-up cues.
Let's do one more practice. This time, we'll focus on keeping the conversation going. Imagine someone says, "I love cooking Italian food."
Take a moment to practice your response. Try to share a brief related experience, and then ask a question to keep the conversation flowing.
These practice sessions might feel a bit awkward at first, but that's totally normal. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
And remember, you can practice these conversations anytime, while you're getting ready in the morning, doing dishes, or even walking down the street.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today about keeping conversations natural and flowing in English.
Absolutely. And you know what I love most about what we discussed? It's all about real, everyday situations that everyone encounters.
Right. The key takeaways are pretty simple. Ask open-ended questions, use those natural fillers we talked about, and most importantly, just stay relaxed.
And don't forget to show interest in what the other person is saying. Those little reactions like, "Oh, really?" and "That's interesting," can make such a big difference.
So, just remember, keeping things light and asking questions is a simple way to keep conversations going. Don't be afraid to practice these techniques whenever you get the chance.
Yeah, and don't stress about sounding perfect. It's about connecting with people. Thanks for tuning in to English Mastery Podcast. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Keep practicing those conversations.
And remember, every conversation is an opportunity to improve. See you in our next episode.